Jeff, thank you so much for being here today with me to talk about what's going on in the trucking world.
My pleasure. Yeah.
All right. Well, here we are in Philadelphia at the HPCLC conference, and I'm delighted to be here to talk about the session with Jeff as presented today at the conference regarding trucking updates and really how it's affecting the pharma supply chain and supply chains overall. I heard you say in the session today that, in fact, Tucker Trucking started in 1964. Is that correct?
61.
61.
Yeah, Tucker Company.
Yeah. Your grandfather started?
Yeah, my grandfather at age 50 left the industry and decided he'd buy this obscure thing called a property broker license, which is known as a freight broker today. And there were maybe 7 of them in existence at the time. And he got his start in 1961.
Very cool. And here you are today.
Yeah, 63 years later. I've been in the business 33 years, and I just discovered or realized that I now just surpassed my dad, who was 32 years in the business last year, I suppose.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So you have a lot of experiences to share with us then.
Absolutely.
Typically at pharma supply chain conferences, we're talking a lot about ocean freight, air freight, because that's where a lot of the temperature control issues and challenges happen. And I think definitely a lot of people took away from the session today about Trucking 2024 that really trucking can't be underestimated just because of the sheer volumes that are being transported and being moved. What was the percentage? 80% of pharma freight moves on trucks?
Well, yeah, it's almost 80% of all freight moves by truck, and right, so every single air freight shipment has to move by truck, unless of course a human being is waiting for it in a car. Right? So you've got all of your air freight has truck on both sides. All of your ocean freight has truck on both sides, and obviously surface freight has trucking. So it's everywhere. In pharma, it's often a black hole of compliance, right? So you'll use a freight forwarder, and you'll evaluate the freight forwarder for compliance to everything in your contract, everything in your SOC. But then a trucking company that no one ever heard of is moving the freight. So that's where I think the industry has really shown a bright light on and tried to say, okay, the companies that we utilize need to make sure that their contractors and subcontractors also, all those companies that we use on the road, are also compliant.
Right. And that can be a big web of subcontracting, like you said.
Yeah, huge.
Let's touch on one of the market trends that you talked about in the session today at the HPCLC conference, which was fraud and the bipartisan bill that's being presented. Is that right?
There's a bipartisan bill in the works. Now, it is an election year, and oftentimes in election years, you don't see a lot of bills move on. But the fact that both sides, ours and D's, have signed on to this bill is encouraging. So there are some rules already in existence that the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, the agency within the DOT that regulates trucking, there are certain rules that are already on the books that they just don't have the funding to enforce. Also, we're asking for, in this bill, we're asking for civil penalties against fraudsters. And it could be a fraudster who is masquerading as a legitimate party, or a bad actor who goes through the process of getting a carrier authority or getting a broker authority. Wow. and cheating the system.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah, so it's become that sophisticated, the fraud schemes.
It has, and necessity is the mother of invention, I suppose, right? And because the freight industry is in this hangover since the post-COVID, right? You have a lot of companies who are a little bit more desperate to stay in business, or individuals who are a little bit more desperate, for revenues. So unfortunately, that need sometimes translates into bad actors appearing and taking shortcuts and harming all of us in the process.
So something to be very, very vigilant about then.
In this industry, my goodness, there are very few industries: defense and healthcare, and then food. that you just can't play with, with the quality of service provider. You just can't have those kinds of whoopses, right?
Yeah.
You've got to know who you're dealing with.
Right. The slides that you had about the increase of number of drivers during the pandemic obviously increased, but then yet today the largest companies have the smallest overall percentage of drivers since then, or you said since the deregulation. Can you explain that a little?
Yeah. So today I presented data on motor carriers and the number of drivers. And it's often said that there's a driver shortage in the country.
Indeed.
And the facts don't support that. There are driver shortages in certain areas, such as liquid bulk, liquid hazardous materials bulk. So petroleum, moving of petroleum and other hazardous or explosive type. Those takes a lot of time and effort to get certified in that. And if drivers can make more money faster without that training and without being off the road, they're going to do that. So those very specific niches have driver shortage. But in reality, over the last decade plus, we've added more than 1 million drivers to the total for-hire driver population. And the number of motor carriers active and for hire have increased 2.5 times. So we've seen a tremendous increase in the number of carriers and the number of drivers in that period of time. When COVID happened, supply chains were completely upended, as all of us know, right? But what we don't recognize is, well, why did freight rates skyrocket during that period of time? Well, if you think about it this way, a trucking company might have 20 loads a day from A to B. And they've been moving those 20 loads for like 7, 8, 10 years or longer, right? It's one of their core customers. So if all of a sudden that supplier no longer ships from A to B, such as restaurants went down during COVID, and hotels, or just your raw materials didn't come in, you're no longer shipping 20 loads a day from A to B. Okay, well, that's one aspect of it. But what the companies in B who were shipping product back to A aren't finding that company in town anymore. So now they have to find a truck. And they've got to pull a trucking company away from somebody else's business. And the only way you do that is by offering more money. Say, look, I'll pay you an extra couple $100 on this load if you leave that customer and go from B to A for me, because I've got customers in A.
Okay.
Right. So you multiply that out times, hundreds of thousands of shippers and hundreds of thousands of trucking companies, and it's hard to fathom, but that's exactly what happened. There wasn't more freight moving during COVID.
Okay.
At no point since 2019 have we moved more freight, according to the Federal Reserve of St. Louis.
Okay.
But we had roughly a 14% increase in drivers during that period of time and a 14% increase in carriers during that time.
Right.
So most of those carriers have left the market. Many of those drivers have left the market, but we're still slightly higher in driver count and carrier count than in 2019 before the pandemic. So they're still there. We might still be in a driver overcapacity situation, which is keeping rates low.
What's the dynamic that you also explained regarding the size of the carrier company?
Yeah, so what we've seen is a steady, gradual build since 2011 in the number of active carriers who are between 1 and 100 trucks. The average size of that fleet is about 5 trucks. So it's not 50 like you would expect between 1 and 100. So what we're seeing is the largest carriers. We hear a lot, if you read the trade press, you see a lot of consolidations, and the biggest carriers are enormous today.
Right.
However, there is such a draw by these owner-operators and drivers who want to drive for smaller fleets to join those smaller fleets, that today there's approximately 50% of all drivers drive for 1 to 100 truck size fleets. That's half of the market is in that small.
Wow.
And we tend to think of large carriers and large shippers, and there are just not that many of them. The percentage of the market that the largest carriers have is the smallest in recorded history.
It's so interesting to learn that actually so many of the semi-trucks and vehicles have become a lot more sustainable in terms of the functionality of the trucks since 1980. Andrew Boyle was presenting that with you this morning. That was fascinating. That, in fact, there's been so much work already done in terms of sustainable trucks. Could you explain a little bit about the history of truck emissions and sort of the evolution of more sustainable vehicles?
Sure. Now, I'll be the first to tell you, we don't own trucks, we don't operate
Right.
trucks. However, the trucking industry and the manufacturers of tractors have had continual improvement in the emissions. And it wasn't that long ago. The joke was that the motor carriers operating in California were putting out cleaner air than they were taking in to their engines. There has been tremendous improvement in the cleanliness of vehicles. However, today, still on average, on a 600-mile truckload shipment carrying about 40,000 pounds, which is almost a full payload, that truck on average is putting up 2.2 metric tons of carbon dioxide.
Okay.
Right? So the question among many of our members here at HPCLC is, okay, how do I reduce that even further?
Yep.
So Andrew Boyle brought up discussion around, the newer the tractor model, the cleaner the air quality and the less CO2 and other emissions go up. And so his point was, if we focus on trying to make tractors newer and require newer tractors, not just picking winners like we're going to say, okay, it's got to be electric vehicles, or it's got to be biodiesel, or it's got to be hydrogen, or it's got to be, let more like the market kind of tell us where that's going, but just say, hey, engine should be newer and have those dates and milestones hit. We can do a pretty major job of cleaning the emissions.
Right. I think he said something like all vehicles with engines after 2010, if we removed everything before that, it would be like something like a 40% reduction in emissions coming from those
Potentially,
tractors.
yeah, potentially. And I don't know that exact fact, but I do know that generally speaking, the SmartWay carriers, if you're part of this EPA SmartWay program,
Yes.
that those carriers are around 40% cleaner than carriers who are not in that program. So I think it's important that, if we're thinking about, and I refer to it in terms of levers, pulling levers, right? So you can pull the lever of, mode conversion from air to ocean. You can pull the lever from maybe truck to intermodal when that makes sense. But you can also pull the lever from non-SmartWay carriers to SmartWay carriers. And those SmartWay carriers, there's, what's special about them? Well, they have the cleaner engines, the newer engines, right? They have the aerodynamic features to the trailers and the tractors even that make, the fuel efficiency a little bit higher. And they might have alternative fuel vehicles as well. So, sticking with those SmartWay carriers and providers, we're a SmartWay provider who utilize SmartWay carriers. That's a really concrete way to improve as we wait for future technologies to come online.
To develop. Right. That was definitely a point I took away from the session this morning. I had no idea SmartWay carriers and what that all involved.
Yeah, it's funny because we've been a SmartWay provider for 14 years now, and as I said in the group today, that no one really has cared. We've cared, but we haven't been able to, get customers interested in, participating. We are going to be reporting, very soon, probably in 2025, early 2025, we're going to be reporting to every customer the emissions by transaction, but also, by month, by quarter, so that the customer can understand, this is what you could, and this is what we're doing.
Okay.
And this is how we can improve it if you want to, take
Move
action.
in that direction. So will you be doing that for just SmartWay vehicle users or all of?
We're going to be using
trucker
it
customers?
for all of our customers,
Okay.
right? So, and if we're using SmartWay carriers to support the business, well, then there'll be a reduction shown,
Sure.
and
And you'll be able to compare.
yeah.
That's fantastic. Touching back on the EPA emissions guidelines regulations from the U.S. government, what does that look like and how is that affecting shippers?
I don't think it's affecting shippers yet. I think there's a couple things that are very concerning. I testified in the House of Representatives about a month and a half ago on a variety of issues affecting transportation. And one of the issues that I stressed upon this Transportation Infrastructure Committee was there are states all across the country who are coming up with their own emission standard, right? And interstate commerce doesn't work that way. It wasn't designed to work that way. We live in a country that is dependent on interstate commerce. And if we have a patchwork of 48 different states dictating what their emissions are within the state, it's completely impossible to move freight, right? So we really need, I would like to see the EPA and the DOT and the federal government saying like no to these states, or saying, okay, we're going to come up with something reasonable, and the states cannot overrule us, right? With regard to interstate commerce. Long time ago, the Interstate Commerce Act kind of put this to bed, this issue of states regulating pricing. Well, now states are using these emission standards to regulate trucking again, and it's completely untenable to have 48 different rules around interstate commerce. So I would love to see that, but I'm not seeing that. No one is seeing that. In fact, what we're seeing is there's a willingness, or seeming willingness, of the federal government to allow states to come up with their own emission standards, and it's not something that you want to see. And I'm not saying that I want dirty air. What I'm saying is we need something that we can all, that's all practical, and we can all move freight effectively. This country is one of our strengths, right? Is energy. One of our strengths is ingenuity. One of our strengths is freedom and democracy. But not to be ignored is the fact that we are the best. We have the best delivery system in the world. There's no one close. Yeah, China's built some great highways, but nobody can deliver freight like we can. Nobody can deliver product. Nobody can deliver drugs and medicines like we can. There's nothing close in the world. And to shut that down by insane regulations is a little bit disconcerting.
Absolutely. What is the next step with all of that then?
I think just continuing to talk with the regulators, continuing to talk to Congress. I think we're in a wait and see right now with regard to the election. If the Trump administration and the next Trump administration were to come in, I think it's a safe bet that they would erase everything, but that's scary as well, because I think, that you want, as a business and as an industry, you need something tangible to plan with. And if you don't know what's coming next, it's impossible to plan.
Right. Jeff, any last comments, advice for those shipping high value products on road in the U.S.?
Yeah, I think, some of my takeaways, a couple of my takeaways today were recognizing that there are, fewer opportunities for the large carriers to come in and support you. Making sure that you have an adequate balance between asset-based and non-asset-based. Non-asset-based doesn't mean that they don't have assets. I mean, yes, we don't have trucks, but we utilize, the right partners, utilize motor carriers that see the business as theirs to quote unquote own, right? And they support the business with 30, 40 trucks a week, whatever the case is. I'd say you have to balance that, because this truckload industry is extremely cyclical. And I don't think there's, after having been through 4 capacity crises in the last 8 or 10 years, nobody's immune. You can't be, including this industry, you cannot consider yourself immune from market forces. They're too big, they're too great. So the best way to go at it is to be smart and a balanced approach. And then I'd say once you have your core group of carriers and providers, 3PLs, you've got to award business based on performance. That to me is the way to go, and it's also enables you to scale with the ups and downs.
Yep. So you're saying give the small guys a chance too.
Yeah. You've got to have a balance, right? You have to have a balance. If you go all big, it's a disaster. And we've got customers here that went all big and had disasters.
Yep.
So.
Yep. I suppose part of the factoring, though, for temperature control is that, the smaller outfits may not have all the temperature control capabilities.
Yeah.
Would that be accurate?
Absolutely. So I'm not talking about going small to like 1, 2, 3, 4 truck guys by any stretch, because those guys are probably not going to have the technology.
Right.
So there's a middle market. There's a 200 to 500 truck, 500 truck to 800 trucks. Those are oftentimes family businesses. They're second generation. They're totally focused on service. Yep. That's a sweet spot, right, to balance out some of the larger carriers that some of our members will use.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you very much, Jeff. I so much appreciate
you.
you sitting down with me today and talking about what's going on in trucking in the supply chain.
Yeah, well, my pleasure. Thank you for
Thank
the
you.
invitation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again.